Good evening. Hey, thank you. I'm Daniel Biss, State Senator in the 9th District, running for Governor of Illinois. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation. I'm going to keep my opening comments super short, so A, I don't get in trouble, and B, we can actually have a real conversation. But I just wanted to say a quick word to contextualize this race. None of this stuff that is happening in my life right now was any part of the plan. None of it. I was a mathematician, which is a very strange plan to have in some people's views, but there it is. I was teaching math at the University of Chicago and saw that we had a president who was lying to us and a country spinning out of control. And I felt like I had to somehow do something about it, and so I started to knock on doors and show up to meetings and do what I could, and became obsessed with the idea that if you could organize people in movements, those movements could make fundamental social change. And that president's name was George W. Bush. And those problems that we had at the time now seem so quaint. But they led me to run for office. I lost the first time. That was very sad. Doesn't matter. Was lucky enough to have a second chance and have been in the legislature since 2011. And now we find ourselves with this new president. And we find ourselves with a level of public engagement that I have certainly not seen in my political life before. In fact, my guess is that a meeting like this would not have been so well attended 4 years ago. And all that is overlaid against this backdrop of the state of Illinois, which, well, right? We have a budget now, and we have a school funding thing now, and all of that is better than if we didn't have those things. But we underwent 2 years and 6 days of not having a budget, 2 years and 6 days of vicious pain the state of Illinois was put through for honestly no reason, and all of that exists on a backdrop of decades of a broken system that just was not working for most of us. And so the question that I think we ought to be asking in this election is not just the kind of political, tactical question, I'm not going to fall off the stage, I think, is not just the political, tactical question of how do we figure out a way to get more votes than Bruce Rauner because he's bad at being governor and so we should have something different. It's how do we set up a Democratic Party so that we don't just beat Bruce Rauner, but we don't go back to having what we had before, which was not adequate if you were a middle-class person or a member of the working poor, which was not adequate if you wanted to have proper funding for our schools, an equitable mechanism of funding our schools, a fair election system, proper funding for higher education, social services, true social and racial justice. All of these things did not happen in Illinois for decades before 2014 when Bruce Rauner was elected. And I think that the combination of the extraordinary pain that our state has been put through recently, together with the level of public engagement we see right now, is a unique opportunity to finally transform Illinois in a meaningful way. And when I saw that coming together, that's why I decided to get into this race. On some level, this race is a search for a long dreamt of unicorn in Illinois, a notion that we could have a people's movement to finally force state government to work for the rest of us. What I've seen so far in the first, not that I'm counting, but 5 months and 3 weeks of this race has been really encouraging. What I saw as I traveled the state for 10 days leading up to Sunday, traveling all kinds of places in Illinois, including lots of places that aren't ordinarily hubs for democratic or progressive activism or electoral activism at all. What I saw is this kind of new fundamental hunger combined with a deep understanding of how screwed up things have been, combined most importantly of all with the sense of, dude, no one's going to fix this for us. We all have to step up together to transform our state. That's what I think provides a really remarkable opportunity to do all of the things that I think probably most people in this room have known for a long time needed to get done, but we couldn't quite figure out the coalition to achieve them. So I look forward to talking tonight about what we need to do as a state, what y'all think we ought to do on behalf of this city and this state, and how we can work together to make sure it happens. Thank you.
And to help us unpack all that, I'd like to invite to the stage Mandy Yo. She's the head of communications for Review Trackers, a really cool startup here in Chicago, and one of the leaders of CLA's civic arm. So, Mandy Yo, thanks.
All right, we're closing it out, people. You ready? So first of all, thank you again so much for coming out here, and thank you all for coming. You guys are the true leaders of who's going to push forward what we're going to do in the next coming years here in the state of Illinois. So thank you so much for everyone for taking your time. So although you kept your opening short, you are in trouble because
I'm so sorry. And also unsurprised.
You took my first question, which is why you ran for governor. Very interesting story that you do have about your time being a mathematician and really understanding to the very core the issues that were going on in the state. Is there anything that you want to tell us a little bit more, maybe the warm fuzzies about why you're wanting to run beyond the fact of the hard, cold math facts of the state?
Well, I'll tell you two quick stories. One is that, I mean, let's be honest, right? Like when politicians run for office, they're always saying that that wasn't the plan, right? There's the trope of the, are you going to run? Oh, I have no idea, but come tomorrow, we'll have a special announcement with a banner that's been printed for the last 6 months, but also meticulously polished throughout that entire period of time. But like, no, for real, I really didn't know. And my dad likes to talk about how last summer he suggested that I should, like summer of 16, he suggested that I should run for, last summer is not 7, right? It's still summer? Can we? Thank you. I have a little bit of calendar panic. I don't know if you mind having a governor with calendar panic. I think it's a good idea, actually. We can talk about that later. It doesn't matter. Anyhow, how's this answer so far?
Keep going. Keep
All right.
going.
So last summer, my dad said, hey, Daniel, you should, except he said, Danny, you should think about, you can't. He said, hey, Danny, you should think about running for governor. And I was like, you lost your damn mind. Like, this is not a good thing for my father. This is premature dementia. I don't like it. And that was my position, honestly, throughout the summer and throughout the fall. And then shortly after the election, I was sitting and talking with my wife, Karen, who was, like a lot of people, extremely rattled by the outcome of the presidential election. And like, we weren't having the should we run for governor conversation. We were just having the like, whoa, this world, what do we do conversation. And she just sort of looked at me and she said, you know what? If we don't do everything that we possibly can to build a better world, if we let this just get worse for the next 8 years and that's what happens and we look back and regret not having done enough, I will never forgive myself. I will never forgive myself. And that was a moment that I thought, well, wait a second, maybe there's a different level of moral obligation, of a responsibility to make this decision not based upon a decision matrix or a set of my own personal career goals, but just in this pivotal moment for our nation, what is the most that we can each one of us do to serve? So that was a moment that really changed my thinking in a significant way. And the next moment was in December when we sat down with our two children, Elliot and Theodore, who at the time were 6 and 8. And we sat down at our kitchen table and we took out a piece of paper and we just made a list. It's called the governor list. And there were 2 columns, the good and the bad, the reasons to run and the reasons not to run. And everybody at the table got to put as much stuff on the list as they wanted. So there were things like a lot of people are hurting and we need to help, or we'd get to see daddy less, or sometimes you just have to try, or people might be mean to daddy. And then we'd like almost run out of stuff to say, and there was this silence, and my 6-year-old Theodore said, wait, I have one more. Daddy might be a bad governor. So that was pretty inspiring too, because I got to prove that kid wrong.
You talk a lot about kind of the atmosphere that we're in, and one of the biggest things that's been happening, especially here in the state of Illinois, is all the talk about education, right? And with the fact that a landmark education bill was just passed this Tuesday, we're curious to understand from your viewpoint, how are you going to address the funding, and specifically, how are you going to address the allocation to the CPS school district?
Well, I'm glad you asked such a simple question next. So
Hard
yes,
stuff.
there was a pretty important bill that passed the House on Monday and the Senate yesterday, and it will supposedly be signed by the governor tomorrow. You should always be careful with those predictions, but that's what we're told will happen. By the way, I voted no, and I'm happy to tell you why I voted no. It's about some pretty strongly held views that I have that I think may or may not be interesting to you. I'll let you guys make that call. But I will say, irrespective of my vote, the good stuff in the bill is good. The good stuff in the bill is, in fact, important. But I also think that in the interests, I know I'm a politician, but in the interest of honesty and transparency, we should be careful not to oversell what's in the bill. Illinois has, for a long time, unfortunately, since before Bruce Rauner became governor, had the most inequitable system of school funding of any state in the union. And that's true for a couple reasons. The reason addressed by this bill is that the formula itself, the formula by which our state allocates state dollars to schools, is antiquated. It was written decades ago. It has not evolved as reality has evolved, and so it is inadequately progressive. But there's a second reason, which in fact is the most important reason, and that is the way in which school dollars are raised. Every state gets its school dollars from a mix of local property taxes, state resources, and a little bit of federal money. Illinois is no different. What's different about Illinois is that we are more property tax reliant and less state dollar reliant than any other state. What does that mean? Well, number one, it means high property taxes, you may have noticed. And number two, it means that obviously inequities in local wealth are reflected in what property taxes districts can raise. But hey, we were reliant on property taxes, so there's a lot of that inequity being injected into the system. And then the state dollars are supposed to counterbalance that inequity, but there's not a lot of state dollars, so they don't do a very good job of that counterbalancing. And the bill doesn't fix that. To fix that, we have to fix our tax system. We have to repeal the preposterous, outdated, anomalous, icky provision of the Illinois Constitution that mandates that we have a flat income tax. We're one of only 4 states in the union that has such a provision in its Constitution, and it's destructive. It makes, among other things, it impossible for our state to raise adequate resources, which is why that state pool of money is too small. And then, because of that, districts are called upon to make up the difference with these preposterously high property taxes. As long as we fund schools that way, our school finances will be fundamentally inequitable. And so we have to make that bold transformation of our tax system, which is a whole series of steps. It's not one school bill. It's a constitutional amendment. And then an overhaul using that constitutional amendment of our state income tax code. Using that overhaul, we'll have some more money to distribute using an even better formula, which then will allow us to bring down property taxes. And when you say all those things in a row, back to our unicorn comment, it was really mine, but you were all with me, I could tell. You sound a little ambitious. You sound a little like, hey, Daniel, you seem like a nice person, but this is a lot to ask for. And I would just say, no, no. One more time, no. This is something that many other states get right today. This is something that is utterly achievable. This is something that we have not had the political courage to do because of who pays for the campaigns and who's in control of our state government. And I would say if we can't make those difficult but fundamental and necessary changes in this time of extraordinary flux, why are we here? Why are we here? And so there's a lot to say more specifically about CPS's finances in particular and how it interacts with the state and how that changed either yesterday or tomorrow, depending on how you count. But fundamentally, if we want to get this right on a big picture level, we have to transform our tax system in order to transform our school funding system. And that's what I intend to do as governor.
I think that deserves, yeah. I think we have time for one more. So one I definitely wanted to touch on with you. This is something that I think is a little bit of a differential in your campaign, so I'm hoping you can speak a little bit to it. I'd like to know your thoughts a little bit more about the single-payer healthcare programs that you're looking to put into place.
Great, thank you very much for that. And I think this is a really very, very live issue in America right now. And it's being used kind of as both a litmus test and a hot potato. So let me explain that. Progressive activists like to challenge elected officials to say they're for single payer. So let's get this out of the way. I'm for single payer. Now, by the way, why would that be? Well, our healthcare system in America is significantly more expensive than any other country on a per capita basis, and yet what we get back, by most measures, is not better. And there's a lot of really complicated reasons for that, and then a lot of less complicated reasons for that. But one very, very significant reason is the impact of the private for-profit health insurance industry that essentially sucks money out of the system to, let's be honest, no one's benefit. Bless you. Additionally, the fact that we have so many payers, such unbelievable fragmentation in the system, diminishes the bargaining power of the payer and therefore ultimately the consumer, and that drives up costs as well. And so single-payer healthcare is a good idea. And for a long time, the sort of standard kind of center-left Democratic position on this issue was single-payer is a good idea, but it's impossible because the consultants told me to say that. Or it's impossible because it's too expensive, or it's impossible because the transition is too complicated. And the last couple years have conspired for a few different reasons to change that discourse. Why? Number one, I think there's been a rising progressive movement, and I would say thank God for that. Number two, with the collapse of the Republican effort to coherently respond to the Affordable Care Act, I think there's less enthusiasm about a kind of a bipartisan sort of centrist consensus mechanism of tweaking the ACA, and if that's falling apart, then why not just do the thing we believed in all along? And as for that reason especially, I think you see a lot of renewed interest in enacting single-payer healthcare. Now, the problem is that it's difficult politically, it's expensive to do, the transition is tricky, and so a lot of people tend to take a position of, hey, I'm for single-payer as long as someone else does it for me. So, for instance, another candidate in this race, J.B. Pritzker, takes the position that single-payer is a great thing for the federal government to do, which is why I'm running for governor, which is kind of an odd position to take. And there are a lot of people in Congress right now who are signing on to a single-payer bill, but they'll acknowledge that, I don't know if that bill has all the details, but hey, the vision is the right vision. So here's what I would say. Number one, the vision is the right vision. The right long-term solution for healthcare in America is single-payer. Number two, the right place to do it, ideally, is the federal government. But number three, I don't believe the federal government will do it unless a state implements it successfully first. So the idea of, I'm for it, but we got to wait for the feds, I think is exactly precisely backwards. So then number four, the question is, what state's going to do it? Well, the state has to have a few criteria. One criterion that might satisfy is it's got to be pretty big, just because you need some scale to make this kind of thing happen. Number two, it needs to be an affluent state, because this is an expensive thing to do, no doubt. Number three, it needs to be a fairly progressive state, ideally with a strong labor movement. And then number four, it needs to be a state whose government is fiscally sound. And so what I would say is 3 out of 4 ain't bad. And our responsibility, at least those of us who believe that single payer is the right thing nationally and who live in Illinois, our responsibility is to say, no, we're going to make it happen here because that's the way to make it happen in Washington. And by the way, though the state government currently doesn't have the resources, the state does. And the reason the state government does not is because of our cowardice around tax policy. And so I'm running to say that we are going to have the kind of bold vision for a fair, workable, modern 21st century tax policy that enables us to fund that transition in the state of Illinois. I'm not running to say that you're going to elect me in November of 2018 and we'll have that done by Valentine's Day 2019. In fact, I reluctantly am running to say that we won't. It's going to take time. We're going to have to dig out of this hole. We're going to have to make difficult choices to have that fair tax system we need. But that's a process we can go through because the resources are there, and if we do it, it will be the spur that will push the federal government in the right direction and transform healthcare in America. Isn't that worth it?
Thank you, Senator Biss. And can we get a huge thank you to Mandy Yo for leading this conversation here. And with that, we want to open it up to a few questions for Senator Biss from the audience here. Bueller? We got one.
Hi, Janita Robinson. This is a little bit of an inside baseball question, but also related to policy. A previous candidate talked about campaign finance reform and about the need for those of us here in the audience to really be willing to listen to somebody who didn't have buckets of money. And so my question for you is, right, you're not a billionaire as far as I know. You didn't start out with the highest name recognition in this race. How do you differentiate yourself and get to victory in the primary and then take on somebody who also then has a lot of independent wealth?
Those are all, I think, very fair questions, Janita, and I'll try to answer all of them because I think they all matter. And you're right. I mean, guilty as charged, not a billionaire, not a millionaire, possibly a thousandaire, but it depends a little bit on the up-to-the-minute valuations of homes in Evanston. Definitely a hundredaire, no question. And so if you're looking for the richest guy in this race, it's not me or the second or probably the third or fourth, to be totally honest. I think we've got to ask ourselves, are we having an election or are we having an auction? And I think that question is really important for the future of the Democratic Party, for the future of the state, for the future of the country, for the future of the middle class, for the future of the working poor. I think that really fundamentally matters. By the way, that doesn't mean that someone can't run and be rich, but man, if we're voting for someone because they're rich, as some people are, to be clear, shame on us. Shame on us. So, yes, I don't have that kind of money. What I do have is a lot of people. And I'm unbelievably appreciative and honored to have the number of people that we have. And in the second quarter of this year, the one ending June 30th, we raised over $1 million. And with the exception of $14 million that one candidate gave himself during the course of that quarter, we outraised the entire field combined. The entire field combined. And that was with thousands of contributions, and some were big, but a lot of them were $7 or $17 or $25 and so forth. And so the question is, in my opinion, not who has enough money in their bank account right now. It's who can run the kind of campaign that we need to run to be successful. And that means hopefully inspiring a lot of people and getting a lot of people to be involved. You know, in December, Rauner gave his own campaign fund a $50 million personal contribution out of his own checkbook, which is a lot of money, to be clear. And in March, Chris Kennedy gave his campaign a $250,000 contribution out of his personal checkbook, which I actually also thought was a lot of money, though I guess by the standards of the era, maybe it's less than I would have thought. And then in April, J.B. Pritzker gave his campaign a $7 million contribution out of his own personal checkbook, and that got published late on a Friday afternoon, and I went home, and Karen and I had a very depressing weekend. And we just thought about, what does this mean? And I will be totally honest with you, for a minute we thought, do we even go on, or do we just give up? But in contemplating what it would mean for the future of this state, if indeed we just decide that we are going to pick the person who has the biggest personal bank account, we decided it was too important. And so we decided after a long, hard weekend of thinking that we're in. And we're committed, and we're believers, and we know what's at stake, and we know what this is about. And so we did the same thing, and on Monday morning, I wrote myself a $25 check. But before I deposited it, I took a picture. I put the picture on Facebook, and it was instantaneous. $25 contributions coming in online from every corner of the state of Illinois. From people who'd never met me before, from people who probably didn't know my positions on the issues. They just know what we know, which is the system in Illinois has not been working for the rest of us because of who pays for the campaigns, because of who the people in office listen to. And if we are able to work together to build a campaign that each of us has a stake in, that will give us a government that each of us has a stake in. In my opinion, that's worth fighting for. And I want to close by saying, you asked a really fair question. I know, Janita, that you're a partisan Democrat like I am, and you want to beat Bruce Rauner like I want to beat Bruce Rauner. And by the way, to be clear, if for some kind of hard to even imagine reason I turn out not to be the Democratic nominee for governor, I will be foursquare behind whoever that person turns out to be. Foursquare. And so some people say, listen, Daniel, you can say this nice thing about elections and auctions, but we've got to beat Rauner, and he's got all that personal money. Don't we need someone with that personal money? And I would just say, no. No, we don't. I was heartbroken when Rauner beat Quinn. I thought Quinn definitely deserved to be elected. But I also don't think that Quinn lost because he didn't have enough money. And I don't meet a lot of people who think that. And there is national interest in this race. There is national interest in this moment in state races, particularly with state races that have redistricting consequences. There are people across the state and institutions and organizations across the state and across the country who are deeply committed to making sure that Illinois has a progressive Democratic governor. And I think the ability will be there if we have a campaign that mobilizes people to raise the money we need. But I also think we need contrast. I also think we need a candidate who can inspire people, a candidate who's running on an aspirational and progressive vision that will cause people to turn out at a midterm election they otherwise might not. And so from a purely tactical standpoint, though I understand the argument, I don't think we should just nominate the richest person. I think we should try to nominate the person who connects with voters the best, who can build the strongest movement, who has the most people working with them, and know that if you've done that properly, the money will follow.
All right. Thank you, Senator Biss. Actually, through the power of technology, our next question is coming from one of our live stream viewers, which shout out to Lauren, Evan, Fritz, and the whole Perfect Cut production team. I believe we've had over 3,500 people tune in to summer all of tonight's activities. So big thanks to Perfect Cut Productions on that for helping us make it
Sure
happen.
makes this room feel inconsequential, huh?
Yeah, no kidding. Well, media is another issue. We'll touch on that. But we actually have a question from Dallas Knapp, and he wrote in, I'm from Central Illinois, and the Illinois Democratic Party is perceived as only representing the urbane and elite segments of Illinois. What makes you the champion of the downstate downtrodden? Thanks, Dallas.
It's such an important question, and I will just be dead blunt here. In my opinion, the Illinois Democratic Party, and quite frankly, the Democratic Party nationally, has made two mirror image fundamental mistakes, both because the party is really obsessed with focusing on those so-called swing areas, areas where there's a district that might flip from one side to the other. Or on the presidential level, swing states that could go one way or the other. So what has that left us doing? Two things. Number one, we've written places off. The Democratic Party has written parts of the state off and has written parts of the country off. And on the flip side, equally true, we've taken our base for granted. And both of those things, in my opinion, are unacceptable. And I think they're morally unacceptable. I think they're the wrong way to build the right kind of party. But I also believe that they're tactically unacceptable. So let's think about why. Imagine a central or southern Illinois area where the state representative district is only 35% Republican, Democratic. It's only 35% Democratic, and so the party might say, we're not going to really compete there because we're not going to win anyway. And so nobody shows up, nobody knocks on doors, nobody listens to the public, nobody engages potential volunteers. What's going to happen in a few years? It's going to be not 35, but 30. But suppose instead that there's a talented candidate in that district who wants to run, and the party says, great, we're going to help you. We're not going to have the resources to support you with a lot of dollars necessarily, but we'll give you know-how and infrastructure. We'll help you recruit volunteers. You and a team of passionate, committed people can go door to door together and share your message and understand what's on people's minds. And by the way, send that information up the food chain so the statewide Democratic Party understands what people need in that part of the state. And then you probably lose, but maybe you get 37% instead of 35%. And more importantly, maybe one of those people you knocked on doors with wants to run for school board, or wants to run for village board or park board or county commissioner, and is successful. And then you've got a Democrat, a progressive, who's actually doing good work for people in the community, changing lives. And then maybe another person who worked on that campaign wants to start an advocacy group that helps advocate with the school board or the village board to change policies and improve people's lives, all of a sudden you have the mechanisms of a real party that's actually working with real people to do real things to improve lives and then over time become more successful and more popular. And the next time round, more people will want to run, and one of them will get 42%. Well, before long, you've got yourself another swing district, but more importantly, you've changed lives in the community, and you've built a party that actually is meaningfully listening everywhere, not just in places that are between 46 and 54% Democratic. The exact same works in areas of our base, where we assume we're going to win anyway, so we don't engage people, we don't empower people, we don't listen to people, we don't include people. And so I'm committed to running a statewide campaign, and I'm committed to leading a statewide Democratic Party. I'm committed to leading a party that leaves no stone unturned, that listens to everyone, that includes everywhere. And I tell you, that sense of alienation runs deep. Because when people are ignored, not just for a couple of years, but longer than that, you can't blame them for assuming nobody cares. So this is something that I think is really, really crucial, and I am utterly committed. We have now organizing groups and organizing committees across the state in places where, again, we don't have the resources to hire a full-time person in that town, but if you're willing to be our organizer, we will empower you, we'll give you the keys, you can recruit people, and we will support your work, and we'll listen to you, and what we learn from you will change what I'm talking about in your community, because that's how it's supposed to work.
And on that note, can we get a huge thank you for Senator Biss and for Mandy Yo? Below 25 bucks. On that note, I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming out and participating tonight. I know it's been a long evening and we've covered a lot, but that's democracy for you. A huge thank you to all of our candidates, to all of you for attending tonight. A couple quick reminders. Please, please, please go check out Go Civic and register for that. Please, please go to the CLA website, www.thecla.org, and check out CLA Remix. We got a big event coming up in October, and we'd love to see all of you again. And I actually want to announce that tomorrow morning, Senator Biss and I will be continuing the conversation on Fox 32 Chicago during the 7 o'clock hour to talk about millennial engagement and grassroots activism here in Chicago and Illinois broadly. So please, if you're interested in this, look us up, CLA. Thanks again for coming out. Hopefully, next time we do this, we'll see a few women up here on stage, too. All the strong women in the room. But thank you kindly, and have a good night.